013445A. Al Assad Air Base in Iraq becomes the starting point of a massive intelligence collapse, where a high-value battlefield communication system worth hundreds of millions of dollars is wiped out in seconds by a precise coordinated missile strike. The BACN ground station, which acts as a universal translator for U.S. forces, is not just damaged, but completely erased from operational existence. When the first wave of Qaem-type ballistic missiles approaches from long range, they travel over mountainous terrain and bypass expected defense assumptions because intelligence analysts believed a direct state-level strike would not happen. This assumption immediately proves wrong as the missiles close in on a cluster of containerized communication modules and satellite link arrays that form the core of the system. The BACN network is what allows different branches of the military to communicate seamlessly, turning complex battlefield data into shared understanding between aircraft, ground units, and naval forces. Without it, the entire coordination structure collapses. In real time, the first impact destroys satellite uplinks, and the second wave of Fateh-class precision missiles follows immediately, designed for high accuracy and rapid terminal phase maneuvering. These weapons hit with such precision that the infrastructure is not just damaged, but structurally erased, turning advanced electronic systems into molten debris and shredded steel inside the containers. Technicians and systems operators have no time to respond as the entire node is removed from the battlefield in a continuous sequence of strikes that feel less like explosions and more like physical force pressing down on the environment. The concept behind this attack is simple yet devastating. Identify the most centralized and high-value communication hub and remove it completely to blind the entire network. The result is a battlefield where advanced aircraft and command systems lose their shared awareness because their digital bridge has been destroyed. The E-11A airborne platform remains in the sky, acting as a flying data relay, but without the ground node it becomes disconnected and unable to transmit or receive meaningful operational data. The intelligence failure is not just in the destruction itself, but in the assumption that such a centralized system could remain safe in a high-threat environment. The aftermath reveals fragments of advanced guidance systems and communication hardware scattered among the wreckage, showing how even highly protected infrastructure can be eliminated when it becomes a predictable fixed point in warfare. The broader lesson becomes clear: modern military strength depends not only on firepower, but on connectivity, and once that connectivity is broken, even the most advanced platforms become isolated and ineffective. This event marks a shift in understanding, where battlefield communication nodes are no longer seen as protected assets, but as vulnerable targets that can decide the outcome of entire operations in seconds. The destruction of the BACN system demonstrates that any centralized intelligence hub carries inherent risk because its location makes it physically targetable regardless of its technological sophistication, and this realization reshapes how modern warfare is understood moving forward. As systems become more advanced, they also become more dependent on uninterrupted communication links, which in turn become primary targets in any high-intensity conflict scenario. And as analysts study the aftermath more deeply, they begin to understand that the strike was not only a kinetic success, but also an information warfare success, because it disrupted the entire decision-making chain at once, forcing multiple branches of military coordination to revert to slower and less connected fallback systems. The loss of real-time data fusion meant that aircraft could no longer rely on shared targeting pictures, and ground units could not receive synchronized intelligence updates, which introduced delays that fundamentally changed the tempo of operations across the entire theater of conflict. This kind of disruption highlights how modern war is no longer defined solely by destruction of physical assets, but by the interruption of information flow that binds those assets together into a functioning system. The BACN node acted as a central nervous system, and once it was removed, the body of the military structure remained intact, but effectively paralyzed in key functions, and this paralysis is what made the strike far more significant than a traditional base attack, because it targeted the logic layer rather than just the physical layer of warfare, and in doing so it exposed a new vulnerability that even highly advanced militaries must now account for in future design, where redundancy, decentralization, and mobility become more important than static power projection and fixed infrastructure, because any fixed point of intelligence aggregation can now be treated as a high-value target with strategic level impact on the entire battlefield architecture. Fast forward into the second layer of the conflict, where the focus shifts away from what was destroyed at Al-Assad and moves toward how the same logic of precision and vulnerability begins to shape a new kind of battlefield understanding in the wider region. The intelligence community starts to analyze not just the loss of the BACN ground node, but the pattern behind why such systems are being targeted with increasing consistency. The answer lies in the nature of modern communication warfare, where Any centralized processing hub becomes a strategic weak point, and in this evolving environment, ballistic systems like Qaem-1 and Fateh 313 emerge as tools designed specifically to exploit that weakness by striking fast and with enough accuracy to remove entire nodes of coordination before they can adapt. The Qaem-1 missile is particularly significant because it represents a finless liquid-fueled ballistic platform that trades traditional aerodynamic stability for reduced radar visibility and increased unpredictability. During its terminal approach, this design choice allows it to move in a way that complicates interception because radar systems are forced to track a smaller and less predictable object moving at high speed across long distances as it approaches its target zone. The absence of stabilizing fins reduces its radar cross-section, making it appear smaller on tracking screens, which in turn shortens the reaction window available to defensive systems, and this is exactly why in the Al-Assad scenario there was little effective interception response. The assumption within intelligence circles was that a direct state-level ballistic strike would not occur in such a bold and exposed manner, but that assumption collapses in real time when the missile sequence begins to unfold and the first impact clears the path for follow-on systems. The second layer of the strike involves Fateh 313 missiles, which represent a different class of precision solid-fuel weapons designed for rapid launch and extremely accurate terminal guidance. These systems are built to minimize launch preparation time, allowing them to be fired with very little warning, which creates a scenario where detection occurs almost simultaneously with impact, reducing the effectiveness of traditional layered defense systems. The Fateh 313 missiles execute a coordinated strike pattern that brackets the BACN infrastructure, meaning they do not rely on a single hit but instead distribute impact points across multiple critical nodes, ensuring total functional collapse of the system. One missile targets satellite uplink arrays, another targets processing containers, and another penetrates deeper structural components designed to house communication relay hardware. This multi-vector approach ensures that even if one section survives, the system as a whole becomes inoperable because the internal network of communication pathways has been physically severed and electronically disrupted at the same time. The effect is not just destruction but systemic paralysis, where every remaining component loses its ability to communicate with others. The ground personnel describe the sequence not as isolated explosions, but as a continuous wave of pressure that overwhelms the entire site, as if the infrastructure itself is being compressed out of existence. And when the final detonation occurs, the battlefield awareness that depended on that node disappears instantly. The E-11A airborne platform continues to orbit at high altitude, acting as a relay node in the sky, but without its ground counterpart it becomes a disconnected sensor unable to transmit meaningful operational data to command centers. This creates a paradox where advanced airborne systems remain intact but operationally useless because their data pipeline has been broken at the ground level. The broader implication of this shift is that modern warfare is no longer defined by platform superiority alone, but by the resilience of the communication architecture that connects those platforms together. And once that architecture is compromised, even the most advanced aircraft and surveillance systems lose their strategic value. The intelligence failure at Al-Assad, therefore, is not only about the physical loss of hardware, but about the deeper misunderstanding of how fragile centralized digital warfare systems can be when exposed to precision long-range ballistic capabilities. The debris analysis later conducted on the site reveals fragments of guidance computers and communication modules, indicating that even sophisticated encryption and electronic protection measures cannot compensate for physical vulnerability when the entire node is exposed at a fixed geographic location. This realization pushes military planners to reconsider how future systems should be structured, with increasing emphasis on decentralization, mobility, and redundancy, rather than relying on single high-value hubs that can be eliminated in one coordinated strike. The Qaem-1 and Fateh 313 combination thus represents more than just a successful attack. It represents a doctrinal demonstration of how layered ballistic systems can dismantle modern digital warfare networks by focusing on the connective tissue rather than the combat platforms themselves. And this marks a turning point in understanding that future conflicts will not only be fought over territory or firepower, but over the ability to preserve or disrupt the invisible information grid that sustains all battlefield decisions. The final phase of this narrative shifts from destruction into evolution, where the aftermath of Al-Assad is no longer just a story of loss, but becomes the foundation for a new generation of tactical thinking that is built directly on the lessons of vulnerability exposed during the BACN strike. Analysts begin to understand that the real battlefield is not just physical terrain, but the invisible network of data that connects every sensor, aircraft, and command unit into a single coordinated system. And once that system is disrupted, the entire structure of modern warfare begins to collapse regardless of how advanced the individual platforms may be. This realization drives a rapid reassessment of how future weapons and communication systems must be designed, because the weakness revealed at Al-Assad is not unique to one location, but inherent in any centralized node-based architecture where critical intelligence flows through fixed points that can be identified and targeted. The response to this vulnerability begins to appear in the form of distributed systems and more autonomous weapons that reduce reliance on any single communication hub. Instead of depending on a central translator, battlefield networks begin to shift toward decentralized logic, where each unit carries more independent processing capability, allowing them to function even when isolated from the main network. This shift is crucial because it directly addresses the failure mode exposed during the BACN destruction, which was total dependency on a single high-value node. The lesson is simple but powerful. If everything depends on one point, then destroying that point collapses the entire system, and modern military doctrine begins to move away from that structure. At the same time, the second half of the narrative, involving the mysterious debris in Iraq, introduces a parallel evolution in offensive capability, where air-launched ballistic systems, like Blue Sparrow and Rampage, represent a new class of weapons designed to overcome advanced air defense systems, such as the S-300. By changing the geometry of attack, these systems are launched from aircraft operating at long-range standoff distances, meaning the launch platform never enters hostile air defense zones. This alone changes the engagement dynamic, because the weapon is already in motion before defensive systems can even respond. Once released, the missile transitions into a high-speed ballistic phase, where it accelerates into the upper atmosphere, reducing drag and increasing terminal velocity, making interception significantly more difficult. The most critical innovation, however, is the separation of the booster stage, which occurs after launch and is later found as debris in the desert. This separation is not accidental, but a deliberate design choice that allows the missile to shed unnecessary mass and reduce its radar signature as it approaches the target. What continues toward the objective is a much smaller and faster kill vehicle that behaves less like a traditional missile and more like a precision-guided kinetic dart, moving at hypersonic speed. This transformation is what makes interception extremely difficult, because radar systems are forced to track an object that is suddenly smaller, faster, and less visible than the original launch signature. The strike on the S-300 radar in Isfahan demonstrates this principle in action, where a system designed to detect and intercept incoming threats is itself neutralized by a weapon optimized specifically to bypass its detection logic. The irony is that the very system built to prevent such attacks becomes ineffective against a weapon that no longer resembles traditional threats. The broader implication of this development is that warfare is entering a phase where speed, geometry, and electronic independence matter more than brute force and large payloads. The battlefield is increasingly defined by sequences rather than single weapons, where each stage of flight, launch, separation, acceleration, and terminal guidance is engineered to defeat a specific layer of defense. This creates a layered contest between offense and defense, where each side evolves not by increasing size, but by increasing intelligence and adaptability. The final insight that emerges from both the Al-Assad strike and the Isfahan debris analysis is that modern warfare is no longer about isolated victories, but about control over systems, whether that system is a communication network or a missile trajectory. The side that understands and manipulates these systems more effectively gains the decisive advantage, and as a result, future conflicts are likely to be decided not by who has the most firepower, but by who controls the most resilient and adaptable sequence of information and action on the battlefield.